The boy sat motionless in the leather chair of his mother's corner office. His eyes open but seeing nothing, tears streaming down a face that had never witnessed its own reflection. His small hands gripped a white cane like a lifeline. Beside him knelt Raymond Ford, the night shift janitor in his worn blue uniform, his weathered hands trembling as he held a small amber bottle with a dropper, one drop of golden liquid clinging to the glass tip. "Raymond, what did you do to the boy?" Victor Dalton, head of estate security, shouted as he burst through the door, his hand already reaching for the radio on his belt, eyes blazing with accusation. The sharp crack of heels echoed down the executive corridor. Melissa Carver, the pharmaceutical empress worth $4.2 billion, stormed into the room like a force of nature. Her face had gone white, and in those sharp green eyes that had stared down senators and FDA commissioners, there was something no boardroom had ever witnessed. Pure, undiluted terror. "What have you done to my son?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Ray, baby, are you hurt?" Raymond looked up, and there were tears cutting tracks through the gray stubble on his jaw. "I didn't hurt him, Miss Carver," he said hoarsely. "I swear to you, I was only trying to help." "Help!" Melissa screamed, the word thundering off the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. "My son cannot see. You put something in my child's eyes. You touched my boy without my consent, without any authority. Victor, restrain him. Now." Victor lunged forward, grabbing Raymond's arms and wrenching them behind his back. The amber bottle clattered to the marble floor, golden liquid pooling like accusation. Everyone in the room stood rigid, faces drained. The air itself seemed to congeal, heavy and suffocating, around the blind boy in the chair. Then something shattered the silence. A gasp, small, fragile, trembling. "Mommy," came from Ray. "Mommy, I can see. I can see lights." His head turned. His unfocused eyes tracked movement for the first time in 8 years. They followed something, the glow of the city through the window, the shape of his mother frozen before him. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice thick with wonder, pointing toward the chandelier. "Why is it so bright?" No one moved. Not Victor, with Raymond's wrists still locked in his grip. Not the security team frozen in the doorway. Not even Melissa Carver, who had spent $47 million and consulted specialists on 3 continents searching for this moment. And that was when she understood. The night janitor had just done what Harvard and Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic could not. The maintenance man had given her son the impossible. He had given him sight. Melissa Carver had built her empire on the certainty of molecules. She understood how compounds bonded and broke, how receptors open like locks for the right chemical keys, how the human body was ultimately a machine that could be decoded, reprogrammed, and repaired. This certainty had made her $4.2 billion, had put her face on the cover of Fortune and Forbes and Time, had filled the penthouse suite atop Carver Pharmaceuticals' global headquarters with art she had no time to admire and furniture she rarely sat upon. The penthouse occupied the entire 47th floor of the tower she had built in downtown San Francisco. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the space in glass, offering a 360-degree view of the bay, the bridges, the city lights that sparkled like earthbound constellations every night. It was designed to inspire awe, to remind visitors that they stood at the pinnacle of human achievement, in a sanctuary where science and wealth had merged into something approaching godhood. Her son had never seen any of it. Ray Carver was 8 years old, and he had lived every one of those years in complete darkness. Not the darkness of a dimmed room or a cloudy night, but absolute darkness, the total absence of light that most human beings would never experience even for a moment. He did not know what his mother looked like. He did not know the color of his own hair, the shape of his hands, the difference between red and blue. When people described the sunset to him, he nodded politely, but the words meant nothing. They were sounds attached to concepts he could not fathom, like trying to explain music to someone born without ears. His diagnosis had been delivered 17 times by 17 different specialists across 3 continents, and every time the words were the same: congenital bilateral optic nerve hypoplasia. Both optic nerves were underdeveloped from birth, carrying insufficient neural fibers to transmit visual information from retina to brain. The MRI scans were unambiguous, the nerve bundles thin and pale where they should have been thick and robust. There was no surgical correction, no medication, no therapy that could grow new nerves where nature had failed to provide them. Melissa had refused to accept this. In the first year of Ray's life, she had spent $3 million on consultations alone, flying specialists from London and Tokyo and Berlin to examine her infant son, to peer into his eyes with their instruments and shake their heads with carefully practiced sympathy. In the second year, she had funded an entire research wing at Stanford dedicated to optic nerve regeneration, writing checks with so many zeros that the department chair had wept. By Ray's 5th birthday, she had enrolled him in 7 different clinical trials across 4 countries. Experimental gene therapies designed to stimulate nerve growth, stem cell injections harvested from umbilical tissue, CRISPR modifications targeting the genetic markers associated with optic nerve development. None of it worked. She had flown Ray to Switzerland for a bionic eye prototype, a device that bypassed the optic nerve entirely and stimulated the visual cortex directly through implanted electrodes. The surgery had taken 11 hours and cost $4.7 million. Ray had spent 6 weeks in recovery, bandages wrapped around his skull, his small voice asking when he would finally see Mommy's face. When they activated the device, he had perceived flashes and static, a chaos of neural noise that the engineers insisted would resolve into meaningful vision with time and training. After 8 months of intensive therapy, Ray could detect the difference between complete darkness and a bright light shone directly into his electrode array. Nothing more. Melissa had fired the entire research team and sued the company for fraud. But still, she did not stop. The penthouse became a monument to her obsession. One entire room was dedicated to filing cabinets containing Ray's medical records, stacked floor to ceiling, organized by date, by specialist, by treatment protocol. Another room housed the servers that ran the AI diagnostic system she had commissioned, a $12 million machine learning algorithm trained on every ophthalmological case study ever published, designed to find patterns that human doctors might have missed. The AI analyzed Ray's scans weekly, comparing them against its vast database, searching for anomalies or overlooked possibilities. Every week, it delivered the same conclusion: prognosis unchanged. No viable treatment pathway identified. Ray moved through this glass tower like a ghost. He had memorized every inch of the executive residence, the precise number of steps from his bedroom to the kitchen, the location of every piece of furniture, the texture of the walls beneath his fingertips. He navigated with a white cane and with the mental map he had built over years of careful exploration. The household staff had been instructed never to move anything without 48 hours' notice, so Ray could update his internal geography. He had no friends his own age. Melissa had tried playdates in the early years, but they had ended in disaster. Other children did not understand why Ray could not catch a ball or find them during hide and seek. They grew impatient with his questions, his need to touch everything, his inability to respond to their visual cues. Eventually, Melissa had decided that socialization could wait until after the cure. There would be time for friends once Ray could see. She told herself this every night as she reviewed the latest research papers, the newest grant proposals, the experimental treatments still years away from human trials. She measured hope in p-values and confidence intervals, in FDA approval timelines and Phase 3 clinical results. She believed with absolute conviction that somewhere in the vast machinery of modern medicine there existed an answer, and that her money and determination would eventually find it. What Melissa could not see, and what her AI could not calculate, was the prison she had built around her son. Ray lived in a tower of glass he could not see, surrounded by wealth that meant nothing to him, monitored by technology that could not help him. His mother loved him fiercely, but she loved him like a problem to be solved. She scheduled his days with therapists and tutors and specialists, an endless parade of adults who assessed and measured and documented his deficits. She read him research abstracts at bedtime instead of stories because she wanted him to understand that science would save him, that the cure was coming, that he simply needed to be patient. Ray was 8 years old, and he had learned that patience meant waiting for a miracle that never arrived. So, on the nights when his mother worked late in her office 46 floors above the city, he could not see. Ray would slip out of his bedroom and wander the halls of the corporate tower. He would trail his fingers along the walls and listen to the hum of the building, and wait for the one person in this glass empire who never spoke to him about clinical trials or neural pathways, or the statistical probability of treatment success. He would wait for Raymond Ford, the night janitor, who simply talked to him like a boy. Raymond Ford had learned to read the language of plants before he learned to read words on a page. His grandmother, Eliza Ford, had raised him in the hollows of eastern Kentucky, in a cabin that clung to the side of Willow Mountain like it had grown there organically from the rock and soil. She was a small woman with hands like tree roots, gnarled and strong, and always smelling of lavender and golden seal, and the wild mint that grew along the creek behind their home. The people of Harlan County called her a yarb doctor, an old word for an old practice, and they came to her cabin from miles around when their children had fevers, their joints ached, or their eyes grew clouded with age. Raymond was 7 years old when she first took him into the woods to gather medicine. She showed him how to identify plants by their leaves, their smell, the way they grew in relation to water and sunlight. She taught him that foxglove could stop a racing heart or kill a man, depending on the dose. She explained that willow bark contained the same compound the drug companies sold as aspirin, and that the pharmaceutical industry had built billion-dollar empires on molecules they had stolen from the forest floor. Knowledge is not worthless just because it does not come with a diploma, she told him once, as they dried chamomile blossoms on wooden racks in her kitchen. The plants do not care whether you have a degree. They work the same for a doctor as they do for a mountain woman. The only difference is the doctor charges more. Raymond carried these lessons with him when he left the mountains at 18. He joined the army, served as a combat medic in the First Gulf War, and discovered that he had a gift for keeping people alive under pressure. After his discharge, he became a paramedic in Lexington, working the night shifts that nobody else wanted, riding the ambulance through neighborhoods where gunshots were common and hope was scarce. He was good at the job. He saved lives. But he never forgot his grandmother's teachings, and he never stopped studying the old ways, even as he learned the new. He met Sarah Whitmore at a coffee shop near the hospital, where he often ended his shifts. She was a librarian, with red hair and freckles and a laugh that made him feel like the sun had come out after a long winter. They married within a year and moved back to the mountains, to a small house not far from where his grandmother had lived. Sarah loved the quiet, the green, the way Raymond could walk into the woods and return with remedies for her headaches, her insomnia, her seasonal allergies. She believed in him in a way no one else ever had. Their daughter, Emma, was born on a spring morning, with rain pattering against the hospital windows. Raymond held his wife's hand through 18 hours of labor, and when the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, he wept with a joy he had not known he was capable of feeling. He had a family now. He had a purpose. He would teach Emma everything his grandmother had taught him, and the old knowledge would live on. For 12 years they were happy. Then Sarah found the lump. It was breast cancer, stage 3, already spreading to the lymph nodes by the time she felt it beneath her fingers in the shower. The oncologists in Lexington were efficient and clinical, laying out treatment protocols like battle plans. Chemotherapy first, then surgery, then radiation, then more chemotherapy. They spoke in percentages and survival curves and 5-year prognosis rates. They never once asked Sarah what she wanted, or how she felt, or whether she was afraid. Raymond watched his wife disappear by degrees. The chemotherapy stole her hair first, then her appetite, then the light in her eyes. She vomited until her throat bled. She developed sores in her mouth that made eating agony. She could not sleep, could not think, could not hold their daughter without wincing from the pain that seemed to radiate from every cell of her poisoned body. The doctors prescribed opioids, but Sarah hated the way they clouded her mind, hated the constipation and the dizziness and the feeling of being trapped inside a body that no longer belonged to her. Raymond began to prepare remedies. He made tinctures of cannabis and turmeric to ease her inflammation. He brewed teas of ginger and peppermint to settle her stomach. He created a salve of arnica and comfrey for the radiation burns that blistered her chest. And slowly, tentatively, he began to wean her off the opioids that were killing her spirit, replacing them with carefully measured doses of kratom and valerian, and the same pain management protocols his grandmother had used for dying patients in the days before hospice care existed. For 3 weeks, Sarah improved. She ate solid food. She smiled. She held Emma without crying. She told Raymond that, for the first time since the diagnosis, she felt like herself again. Then her oncologist discovered what he was doing. The confrontation happened in a sterile conference room at the cancer center. 3 doctors and a hospital administrator sat across from Raymond and Sarah like a tribunal passing judgment. They called his remedies dangerous interference. They said he was practicing medicine without a license. They threatened to report him to Child Protective Services for endangering his daughter by keeping unregulated substances in the home. They told Sarah that if she continued to refuse the prescribed pain management protocol, they could not guarantee her care. Sarah was too weak to fight. Raymond was too afraid of losing custody of Emma to resist. They surrendered. They followed the protocol. Sarah went back on the opioids at higher doses than before, and the light that had briefly returned to her eyes flickered and went out. She died 11 weeks later in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and whirred and measured the exact moment her heart stopped beating. Raymond held her hand as she went. Her last words were a whisper so faint he had to lean close to hear them. "You were right. It helped. Do not forget what you know." He buried her on the mountain beside his grandmother, and he wept until he had no tears left. Then he sold the house, because he could not bear to walk past the bedroom where she had suffered. He moved Emma to San Francisco, where his cousin had found him work, where no one knew his name or his shame, or the knowledge he carried like a stone in his chest. He became a janitor. He worked the night shift at Carver Pharmaceuticals, mopping floors and emptying trash cans, and watching through windows as scientists in white coats tested molecules that might have saved his wife if anyone had listened. He was invisible to them. He was nothing. He was exactly what the world expected a man without credentials to be. But every night after Emma fell asleep, he studied. He read medical journals and research papers and case studies. He maintained his grandmother's recipes and refined his formulations, and kept a small locked cabinet of remedies in his apartment just in case. He was waiting, though he did not know for what. He was waiting to prove that Sarah's faith had not been misplaced. The night shift at Carver Pharmaceuticals began at 10 and ended at 6, and in between those hours Raymond Ford became a ghost. He moved through the gleaming corridors with his mop and his cart and his ring of keys that opened every door in the building. He emptied trash cans in laboratories where machines worth more than his entire life savings hummed and blinked through the darkness. He polished the marble floors of the executive lobby until they reflected the security lights like black mirrors. He cleaned bathrooms that cost more to construct than the cabin where his grandmother had lived and died, And he did it all without complaint because the work was honest, and the pay kept Emma in school, and the silence gave him time to think. Most nights he saw no one except the security guards, who nodded at him without really seeing him. The scientists and executives had long since gone home to their families and their expensive dinners and their lives that existed in a different universe than his. Raymond preferred it this way. He had no desire for conversation, no need for the awkward small talk that came when people noticed the janitor and felt obligated to acknowledge his existence. He was comfortable in his invisibility. It was a kind of freedom. But on a Tuesday night in late October, everything changed. He was mopping the 46th floor, the executive residential level that housed the private apartments of the Carver family, when he heard a sound that did not belong. A soft tap, tap, tap echoing down the corridor. He stopped and listened. The sound grew closer, rhythmic and deliberate, and then a small figure emerged from the shadows. It was a boy. He could not have been more than 8 years old. He wore pajamas decorated with cartoon rockets, and he moved with careful precision, his left hand trailing along the wall, his right hand holding a white cane that swept the floor before him in practiced arcs. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing, fixed on a point somewhere beyond the physical world. He was humming softly to himself, a tune Raymond did not recognize, and he seemed utterly unafraid of the dark, empty hallway that would have terrified most children his age. Raymond stood frozen, unsure what to do. He knew who this must be. Everyone at Carver Pharmaceuticals knew about the boss's son, the blind boy who lived in the penthouse, the tragedy that all the money in the world could not fix. But knowing about the child and encountering him alone at 2 in the morning were very different things. Raymond was acutely aware of his position. He was the janitor. He had no business speaking to the heir of a pharmaceutical empire. If anyone saw them together, if anyone misinterpreted the situation, he could lose his job or worse. But the boy looked so small, so alone. Raymond cleared his throat softly, not wanting to startle him. The boy stopped immediately, his head tilting like a bird listening for predators. "Who is there?" the boy asked. His voice was calm but cautious. "You are not Marcus. Marcus walks heavier. You are not Dr. Chen. She wears heels. Who are you?" Raymond was impressed by the observation. The boy had identified him by the sound of his footsteps, by the absence of familiar patterns. He had built a world of information from sources that seeing people never thought to notice. "My name is Raymond," he said gently. "I am the night janitor. I clean the floors and empty the trash. I did not mean to frighten you." The boy's posture relaxed slightly. "You did not frighten me. I do not frighten easily. I am Ray. This is my floor. I live here." "I know who you are," Raymond said. "Should you not be in bed at this hour?" Ray shrugged with the practiced indifference of a child who had learned that rules were negotiable. "I could not sleep. I never sleep well. The building is quieter at night. I like to walk when it is quiet. No one bothers me. No one asks me how I am feeling or whether I want to try a new therapy." There was a weariness in his voice that did not belong to an 8-year-old. Raymond recognized it. It was the weariness of someone who had been poked and prodded and studied until they felt more like a specimen than a person. He had seen the same exhaustion in Sarah's eyes during her final months. He made a decision that he knew might cost him everything. "Well," he said, "if you cannot sleep, perhaps you would like some company on your walk. I have to clean this floor anyway. We might as well walk together." Ray considered this for a moment. Then a small smile flickered across his face, the first genuine expression Raymond had seen. "Okay, but you have to describe things to me. Everyone else just walks in silence. They do not tell me what they see. What would you like me to describe?" "Everything," Ray said. "I want to know what everything looks like." And so Raymond began to paint the world in words. He described the windows first, the vast panels of glass that wrapped the corridor, and the city that glittered beyond them. He told Ray about the lights of San Francisco, how they cascaded down the hills like rivers of gold and white and amber. He described the bay, black as velvet under the night sky, and the bridges that stretched across it, their suspension cables strung with lights like strings of pearls. He told him about the fog that crept in from the ocean, how it moved like a living thing, swallowing the tops of buildings and muffling the sounds of the city. Ray listened with his whole body. His face turned toward the windows he could not see, and his lips parted slightly as if he could taste the words. He asked questions constantly. What color is fog? What does gold look like compared to white? How do you know when the sun is about to rise? Raymond answered every question with patience and care. He did not simplify or condescend. He treated the boy's curiosity as valid and important, because it was. And somewhere in that first conversation, he stopped seeing Ray as the blind child of his billionaire employer and started seeing him simply as a boy. A lonely boy who wanted desperately to understand a world that had been denied to him. A boy who reminded him, with an ache that never quite faded, of the child Emma had been at that age. Curious and hungry for knowledge, and trusting in a way that broke his heart. They walked together for an hour that first night. When Raymond finally insisted that Ray return to bed, the boy asked if he would be working tomorrow night too. I work every night, Raymond said. Then I will find you again, Ray said. You talk to me like I am a real person. Most people do not. He disappeared down the corridor, his cane tapping its steady rhythm, and Raymond stood alone in the darkness, feeling something he had not felt in years. He felt like he mattered. Victor Dalton had spent 23 years protecting people who mattered. He had stood post outside the Oval Office during 2 administrations. He had taken a bullet in Bogota, shielding a diplomat whose name was still classified. He had walked the rope lines and scanned the crowds, and learned to identify threats in the twitch of an eye, or the positioning of hands, or the particular way a person moved when they were carrying concealed intentions. He had retired from the Secret Service with a folder full of commendations, a body full of scars, and a permanent vigilance that never quite turned off, even when he slept. Melissa Carver had hired him 4 years ago at a salary that made his government pension look like pocket change. His job was simple: protect the family, protect the company, identify threats before they materialized, and neutralize them with whatever force the situation required. He had a team of 12 under his command and access to surveillance systems that would have made his former colleagues weep with envy. Every door, every corridor, every elevator in the Carver Tower fed into his security center, where banks of monitors displayed the building's secrets in high definition. He had noticed the janitor 3 weeks ago. At first, it was nothing, a blip on the overnight footage. The maintenance worker, Raymond Ford, lingering on the 46th floor longer than his duties required. Victor had pulled the man's file and found nothing remarkable. 54 years old. Widower. 1 daughter. No criminal record. Former paramedic. Currently employed through a contracted cleaning service that had passed all background checks. He was nobody. He was exactly what he appeared to be. But Victor had not survived 2 decades of protecting high-value targets by ignoring his instincts. He began watching more closely. He noticed that Ford's cleaning route had shifted subtly over the past month, spending more time on the residential floor and less in the laboratories below. He noticed that the janitor often paused near the windows at odd hours, staring out at the city as if waiting for something. And then he noticed the boy. The footage showed them walking together through the corridors at 2 and 3 in the morning. The janitor talked constantly, gesturing toward windows and walls and fixtures, while the blind child listened with obvious fascination. They sat together sometimes on the benches near the elevator bank, the old man describing things the boy would never see, while Ray leaned toward him with an attention he never showed his therapists or tutors. Once, Victor saw the janitor touch the boy's shoulder, gently guiding him around a wet patch of floor, and something cold settled in his stomach. He knew predators. He had studied them, trained against them, testified about them in court. They were patient. They built trust slowly. They made themselves indispensable to their targets before they struck. And this janitor, with his sad eyes and his gentle voice and his convenient friendship with a vulnerable child, fit a pattern that Victor had seen before. He decided it was time to have a conversation. Raymond was restocking his cart in the maintenance corridor on the 32nd floor when the door swung open and Victor Dalton stepped inside. The space was cramped, barely larger than a closet, lined with shelves of cleaning supplies and replacement light bulbs, and the chemical smell of industrial solvents. Victor closed the door behind him, and the click of the latch sounded very loud in the confined space. "Mr. Ford," Victor said, "we need to talk." Raymond looked up from the bottles of floor cleaner he was organizing. His expression was calm, but Victor saw the flicker of wariness in his eyes. The man was not stupid. He knew this was not a social visit. "Of course," Raymond said. "Is there a problem with my work?" "Your work is fine," Victor said. "Your work is not the issue. The issue is your extracurricular activities on the 46th floor." Raymond's hands stilled on the cleaning supplies. "I do not understand." Victor took a step closer. The corridor was narrow enough that he now occupied most of Raymond's personal space, a deliberate intimidation tactic that had made harder men than this back down. "I have footage," he said quietly. "Hours of footage. You and the Carver boy walking the halls in the middle of the night. Talking. Sitting together. You touched him once. His shoulder. I saw it. I was guiding him around a wet floor," Raymond said. "He could have slipped." "You were building trust," Victor said. "I have seen it before. The lonely child. The friendly stranger. The gradual escalation. I know how this works, Ford. I have put men in prison for what you are doing." Something shifted in Raymond's eyes. The wariness was still there, but beneath it now burned a heat that Victor had not expected. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but there was iron underneath it. "I am not doing anything," he said. "The boy cannot sleep at night. He wanders the halls. He is lonely in a way that should break your heart if you had one. All I do is talk to him. I describe the world he cannot see. I treat him like a human being instead of a problem to be solved. If that is a crime, then I am guilty." Victor leaned closer. "You are the help. You mop floors. You empty trash cans. You do not play doctor with a billionaire's son. You do not form attachments to the heir of a pharmaceutical empire. Do you understand me?" Raymond did not look away. He held Victor's stare with a stillness that seemed to come from somewhere deep and unshakable. Victor had seen that look before. It was the look of a man who had already lost everything that mattered, and therefore had nothing left to fear. "I understand you," Raymond said softly, "but I am not going to stop talking to that boy. He needs someone who sees him as more than a diagnosis. He needs someone who listens. If you want to fire me for that, then fire me. If you want to call the police, then call them. But I will not abandon a child because a man with a badge and a gun decided that kindness is suspicious." For a long moment, neither man moved. Victor was not accustomed to defiance. He was accustomed to people folding under the weight of his authority, to apologies and promises and the quick compliance of the guilty. This janitor, with his worn uniform and his calloused hands, was not folding. "Stay away from the boy," Victor said finally. "This is your only warning." He turned and walked out without waiting for a response. The door slammed shut behind him, and Raymond stood alone in the narrow corridor, surrounded by the smell of chemicals and the echo of threats. He did not sleep that night. He lay in his small apartment and stared at the ceiling and thought about Sarah. He thought about the doctors who had dismissed her pain. He thought about the administrators who had threatened to take Emma away. He thought about all the times in his life when powerful people had told him to stay in his place, to accept his invisibility, to surrender the knowledge and the instincts that made him who he was. He thought about Ray's face when he described the sunset, the wonder in the boy's voice when he asked what gold looked like. In the morning, he made his decision. He would be more careful. He would watch for cameras and avoid the routes that Victor's team monitored most closely. He would make sure they were never seen together in ways that could be misinterpreted. But he would not stop. Some things mattered more than safety. It was a Thursday night in early December when Raymond first noticed the boys' hands. They were walking their usual route along the corridor of windows on the 46th floor. Raymond was describing the rain that streaked the glass, telling Ray how the droplets caught the city lights and fractured them into tiny prisms of color. The boy was listening, but something was different. His attention kept drifting. His responses came slower than usual, and every few minutes, his hands rose to his face, pressing against his closed eyelids with a pressure that seemed almost desperate. Raymond stopped talking. "Are you all right?" he asked. Ray dropped his hands quickly. "I am fine. Keep telling me about the rain." But Raymond had spent too many years reading bodies to miss the signs. The tension in the boy's shoulders, the slight furrow between his brows, the way he winced almost imperceptibly when his fingers touched his eyes. Something was wrong. "Ray," he said gently, "you can tell me." For a moment the boy was silent. Then his small shoulders slumped, and the words came out in a rush, as if he had been holding them back for a very long time. "My eyes hurt. They hurt all the time. Inside. Like something is pushing from the back. And they feel heavy. Like there is sand in them or rocks or something that should not be there. I told Dr. Chun, and she said it was my imagination. I told the specialist from Boston, and he said blind people do not have eye pain because my condition affects the nerves, not the eyes themselves. I told my mother, and she called another doctor, and he said the same thing. Everyone says I am imagining it. But I am not imagining it, Mr. Raymond. It hurts. It really hurts." His voice cracked on the last word, and Raymond felt something twist in his chest. He knew that sound. He had heard it in Sarah's voice during those terrible months when the doctors told her that her symptoms were psychosomatic, that the pain she felt could not possibly be as bad as she described, that she needed to adjust her expectations and accept her condition. He had watched his wife shrink under the weight of professional dismissal until she stopped reporting her pain at all, because no one believed her anyway. "How long has this been happening?" he asked, keeping his voice steady even as his mind raced. "I don't know," Ray said. "A long time, since before I can remember, maybe, but it has been getting worse, especially at night. That is why I cannot sleep. It hurts more when I lie down. When I walk, it is a little better. That is why I wander the halls. It is the only thing that helps." Raymond's instincts screamed at him. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. He knew the boy's diagnosis: congenital bilateral optic nerve hypoplasia, a condition affecting the development of the optic nerves, should not cause pain. The nerves themselves were underdeveloped, which meant fewer pain receptors, fewer signals, fewer sensations of any kind. If anything, the boy should feel less in his eyes than a sighted person, not more. Unless the diagnosis was wrong. Unless there was something else happening that no one had thought to look for because they were so focused on what they expected to find. Raymond knew he was crossing a line. He knew that what he was about to do could end his career, could land him in jail, could destroy everything he had rebuilt since Sarah's death. Victor Dalton's warning echoed in his mind. You do not play doctor with a billionaire's son. But he also knew that he could not walk away. Not from this. Not when a child was in pain and no one was listening. Ray, he said quietly, I want to look at your eyes. Not like the doctors do. I just want to see them. Is that okay? The boy hesitated. Then he nodded. Raymond pulled a small penlight from his pocket. He carried it for checking dark corners and reading labels in dim storage rooms. He had never imagined using it for this. He knelt down so he was at the boy's level and gently tilted Ray's chin upward. I need you to open your eyes as wide as you can, he said, and try to hold still. Ray complied. His eyes were a pale blue, almost gray, the color of winter sky. They were beautiful and empty, and they should have been clear. But they were not. Raymond leaned closer and shone the penlight at an angle, trying to illuminate the surface of the corneas without shining directly into the pupils. What he saw made his breath catch. There was cloudiness, a faint haze across both corneas that should not have been there. And beneath the haze, barely visible in the thin beam of his penlight, he could see deposits. Tiny, irregular formations clustered around the edges of the irises, like frost crystals forming on a window. They were subtle. A casual observer would never notice them. But Raymond had spent his life looking at things that other people missed, and he knew instantly that this was not normal. This was not congenital optic nerve hypoplasia. This was something on the surface of the eyes themselves, something that was blocking light before it ever reached the retinas, something that was causing pressure and pain, and the sensation of heaviness that the specialists had dismissed as impossible. Thank you, he said softly. You can close your eyes now. What did you see, Ray? Asked Ray. Did you see something wrong? Raymond chose his words carefully. I saw something that I want to learn more about. But I need you to do something for me. I need you not to tell anyone about this. Not your mother. Not Dr. Chun. Not the security man with the angry voice. Can you do that? Ray nodded solemnly. I can keep a secret. I am very good at secrets. That night, Raymond did not sleep. He sat at the small desk in his apartment, surrounded by medical journals and research papers and his grandmother's handwritten notebooks. He searched databases and cross-referenced symptoms and followed threads of information that led him deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole of parasitology and ophthalmology, and the intersection of the two. By dawn, he had his answer. Acanthamoeba keratitis, a rare parasitic infection of the cornea, caused by a microscopic organism found in water and soil. It created deposits on the corneal surface that progressively clouded vision. It caused intense pain, described by patients as pressure and heaviness and the sensation of something foreign in the eye. It was frequently misdiagnosed because doctors rarely looked for it, especially in patients whose blindness was attributed to other causes. In Ray's case, the infection had likely been present since infancy, slowly building layers of opacity over his corneas while every specialist in the world focused their attention on his optic nerves. They had been looking in the wrong place for 8 years. The infection was treatable. Not easily and not quickly, but treatable. Modern medicine used antifungal drops and antiseptic solutions and, sometimes, surgical debridement to remove the deposits. But Raymond knew another way. His grandmother had treated eye infections in the mountains for decades, using a preparation of golden seal and eyebright and a compound derived from black walnut hulls that had natural antiparasitic properties. He had the recipe in her notebook. He had the ingredients in his locked cabinet at home. He could help this boy. The thought terrified him. The consequences, if he was wrong, were unimaginable. But the image of Ray's face, twisted with pain that no one believed was real, burned in his memory like a brand. And somewhere beneath his fear, a voice that sounded very much like Sarah whispered that this was why he had survived. This was why he had kept the old knowledge alive. This was the moment he had been waiting for, without knowing it. He began to prepare the extract. Melissa Carver had been staring at the same quarterly report for 3 hours. The numbers blurred together, columns of revenue and expenditure and projected growth curves that should have commanded her full attention. Carver Pharmaceuticals was preparing for its largest product launch in company history, an immunotherapy treatment that had taken 11 years and $2 billion to develop. FDA approval was imminent. The stock price would triple. Her board members were euphoric. And Melissa could not focus on any of it, because somewhere above her head her son was lying awake in pain that no one could explain. She had spoken to Dr. Chun again that afternoon. The neurologist had run another battery of tests and found nothing new. The optic nerves remained underdeveloped. The visual cortex showed no unusual activity. Ray's complaints of eye pain were noted in the file with the same dismissive phrase that had been used a dozen times before. Psychosomatic manifestation consistent with patient's ongoing adjustment to permanent visual impairment. Recommend continued behavioral therapy. Melissa had wanted to scream. Her son was not adjusting. Her son was suffering. And every specialist she consulted told her the same thing. The pain was not real. The pain could not be real. The condition did not work that way. She closed the report and rubbed her eyes. It was nearly midnight. She should go upstairs and check on Ray. She should try to sleep herself, though sleep had become a stranger to her in recent months. She gathered her things and walked to the private elevator that connected her office to the penthouse above. The doors opened on the 46th floor, and immediately she knew something was wrong. Her office door was ajar. Light spilled into the corridor from within, and she could hear voices. Her son's voice, high and uncertain, and another voice, deeper, male, familiar in a way she could not immediately place. She moved quickly, her heels silent on the carpet. She pushed the door open, and the scene before her stopped her heart. Ray was sitting in the leather chair by her desk. His white cane leaned against the armrest. His eyes were open and wet with tears that he had never been able to see. And kneeling before him was a man in a worn blue janitor's uniform, holding a small amber bottle with a glass dropper. The man was speaking softly, explaining something to her son, and his weathered hands trembled as he held the bottle up to the light. It was the night janitor, Raymond Ford, the man Victor had warned her about weeks ago, the man she had dismissed from her thoughts because she had bigger problems than a maintenance worker who talked too much to her son. "What is happening here?" Her voice came out cold and sharp, and both figures turned toward her. Ray's face crumpled with something that looked almost like fear. The janitor rose slowly to his feet, the amber bottle still clutched in his hand. "Miss Carver," he began. But before he could say another word, the door crashed open behind her and Victor Dalton stormed into the room. He must have been monitoring the cameras. He must have seen everything. His face was rigid with controlled fury as he lunged for Raymond, seizing his arms and wrenching them behind his back with practiced force. The amber bottle fell from Raymond's grip, and Victor kicked it aside, where it rolled against the wall, its golden contents sloshing. "I told you," Victor growled. "I warned you what would happen." Melissa stepped forward. Her heart pounded in her ears. Her son was crying now, silent tears streaming down his cheeks, and she did not know if they were tears of pain or fear or something else entirely. "Someone tell me what is happening," she demanded. "Now." Raymond did not struggle against Victor's grip. He stood quietly, his eyes fixed on Melissa with an intensity that unnerved her. "Your son has an infection," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "It is not congenital blindness, Miss Carver. It is something on the surface of his eyes. Deposits. Clouding. I have seen it with my own eyes. The pain he has been reporting for years is real. The specialists missed it because they were looking at his optic nerves instead of his corneas. Melissa stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "Acanthamoeba keratitis," Raymond said. "A parasitic infection. It mimics other conditions. It causes progressive corneal opacity. Your son's eyes are being covered by deposits that block all light from entering. The optic nerves may be underdeveloped, but that is not why he cannot see. He cannot see because something is literally coating his eyes from the inside out." "That is insane," Melissa said. "My son has been examined by 17 specialists. He has had every test imaginable." "They were looking in the wrong place," Raymond said. "They saw the optic nerve abnormality and they stopped looking. They dismissed his pain because it did not fit their diagnosis. I have read his medical files. I found them in the office trash. 22 documented complaints of eye pain over 6 years. Every single one attributed to psychosomatic causes. Your son has been telling the truth, and no one has listened." Melissa felt the floor tilt beneath her. She turned to Ray, who sat frozen in the chair, his hands gripping the armrests. "Ray," she said, "is this true? Have you been in pain?" "I tried to tell you," the boy whispered. "I tried to tell everyone. No one believed me." The words hit Melissa like a physical blow. She thought of all the appointments, all the specialists, all the times her son had mentioned his eyes hurting, and she had patted his hand and assured him the doctors knew best. She had trusted the experts. She had measured hope in clinical trials and peer-reviewed studies. And she had never simply believed her own child. She turned back to Raymond. "What is in that bottle?" "A traditional preparation," Raymond said. "My grandmother used it for eye infections. Golden seal, eyebright, black walnut compounds. It has antiparasitic properties. I believe it can dissolve the deposits on your son's corneas." "You believe," Melissa said. "You believe. You are a janitor. You have no medical degree. You have no right to diagnose my son or propose treatments based on folk remedies and garbage you found in my trash." Raymond's jaw tightened. "I am a father," he said quietly. "I am a father who watched his wife die in agony because people like you would not listen. The doctors said her pain was not real either. They dismissed her symptoms because they did not fit the expected pattern. They let her suffer because their degrees told them they knew better than the woman living inside her own body. I will not let that happen again. Your son is in pain, Miss Carver. The specialists are wrong. And I can help him if you let me." The room fell silent. Victor's grip on Raymond's arms remained iron-tight. Melissa stood motionless, torn between rage and doubt and a desperate, flickering hope that she did not dare acknowledge. Then Ray spoke. "Mommy." His voice was small, fragile. He reached out his hand, groping blindly in Raymond's direction until his fingers found the janitor's sleeve and held on. "I trust him," he said. "Mr. Raymond is my friend. He listens to me. He believes me. Please, Mommy, please let him try." Melissa looked at her son, her beautiful, broken boy who had spent 8 years in darkness, who had been poked and prodded and tested and failed by every expert she could buy, who was now reaching for a janitor with a bottle of herbal extract because that janitor was the only person who had ever truly heard him. She made her decision. "1 dose," she said. Her voice shook. "If anything goes wrong, I will have you arrested. I will destroy you. Do you understand?" Raymond nodded. "I understand." Victor released him. Raymond knelt before Ray once more. He retrieved the amber bottle from where it had rolled against the wall, and with hands that trembled only slightly, he drew golden liquid into the dropper. "Tilt your head back," he said softly, "and try to keep your eyes open." The first drop fell into Ray's left eye like liquid gold. Raymond held the dropper steady, his breath shallow and controlled, as he watched the herbal extract pool against the boy's cornea. Ray flinched slightly at the sensation but held still, just as Raymond had instructed. The second drop followed, then a third. Raymond moved to the right eye and repeated the process with the same careful precision his grandmother had taught him 40 years ago in a cabin that smelled of lavender and healing. "There," he said softly. "Keep your eyes closed for a moment. Let it settle." Ray obeyed, his small hands gripping the armrests of the leather chair. Melissa stood frozen by the door, her face a mask of terror and desperate hope. Victor remained at his post near the wall, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip, his eyes fixed on Raymond with an intensity that promised swift violence if anything went wrong. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the building's climate control and the distant murmur of the city 46 floors below. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. Raymond pulled a chair close to Ray and sat down. He did not touch the boy. He did not speak. He simply waited, watching for any sign of reaction, positive or negative. The extract was working or it was not. There was nothing more he could do now except be present. Melissa broke first. "What is supposed to happen?" she demanded. "How long does this take? What are we waiting for?" "I do not know," Raymond admitted. "My grandmother used this preparation on infections that were diagnosed early. She saw results within hours sometimes. But your son's condition has been building for years. The deposits are thick. It may take longer, or it may not work at all. I cannot promise anything, Miss Carver. I can only tell you that I believe this is his best chance." "His best chance," Melissa repeated bitterly. "His best chance is a bottle of herbs mixed by a janitor in his apartment. Do you have any idea how insane that sounds?" Raymond met her eyes. "I have some idea, yes." Another silence fell. 30 minutes crept by. Ray sat motionless in the chair, his eyes still closed, his breathing slow and even. Melissa paced the length of her office, unable to stand still. Victor watched without moving, a statue carved from suspicion and duty. Then Ray spoke. "It feels different." Everyone in the room went rigid. Raymond leaned forward. "Different how?" "The heavy feeling," Ray said slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It is getting lighter, like something is dissolving. The pressure behind my eyes, it is fading." Raymond's heart hammered against his ribs. "Can you open your eyes?" Ray opened them. They were still unfocused, still staring at nothing visible to the others in the room. But something had changed. The cloudiness that Raymond had seen with his penlight seemed slightly less dense. The pale blue of the boy's irises appeared marginally brighter. Could have been wishful thinking. Could have been the light in the room. Or it could have been the beginning of something impossible. 1 hour passed. Ray blinked rapidly, his hands rising toward his face. Melissa started forward, but Raymond held up a hand to stop her. "Let him be," he said quietly. "His eyes are adjusting." "Adjusting to what?" Victor demanded. "He cannot see anything. The heavy feeling is almost gone," Ray said. His voice was strange, wondering. "And there is something else. When I blink, I see flashes. Bright flashes, like lightning far away. Is that normal?" Raymond felt tears prick at his eyes. "That is light," he said. "You are seeing light." Melissa made a sound like a wounded animal. She pressed her hand against her mouth and stared at her son. 2 hours passed. Ray was no longer sitting still. He turned his head this way and that, tracking something invisible to the others. His unfocused eyes moved in patterns they had never moved before, following stimuli that should not have existed for a boy with his diagnosis. "Mommy," he said suddenly. His voice cracked with wonder. "I see something. It is moving. What is it?" Melissa rushed to his side. "What do you see, baby? Tell me what you see." "It is bright," Ray said. "Very bright. And it keeps changing. It is like the lightning, but bigger. It fills up part of the room." Raymond crossed to the window and pulled back the curtain. The city blazed beyond the glass, 46 floors of empty air between the penthouse and the lights below. The fog had rolled back, and San Francisco glittered like a field of stars brought down to earth. "It is the city," Raymond said. "The lights of the city through the window. That is what you are seeing, Ray. That is what the world looks like at night." Ray turned toward the sound of his voice, and for the first time his eyes seemed to track in the right direction. They did not quite focus. They wandered slightly, searching for a target they did not yet know how to find. But they moved with purpose. They moved toward something real. 3 hours passed. Ray stood in front of the window, his white cane forgotten on the floor behind him. His hands pressed against the glass, and his breath fogged the surface in small clouds that appeared and vanished in rhythm with his wonder. "I can see shapes," he whispered. "Dark parts and bright parts. They make patterns. And there," he pointed with a trembling finger, "something big. What is that?" "That is the Bay Bridge," Raymond said. "It stretches across the water to Oakland. The lights you see are cars crossing from one side to the other." Ray laughed. It was a sound of pure joy, utterly uncontained. He turned back toward the room, and his eyes found his mother's shape standing behind him. She was a silhouette against the office lights, a dark outline with no features. "Mommy," he said, "I can see you. I can see where you are. I know which shape is you." Melissa fell to her knees. She wrapped her arms around her son and pulled him against her chest, sobbing with an abandon that Raymond had never seen from her before. All of her control, all of her authority, all of the armor she wore to protect herself from a world that had failed her son again and again, crumbled away. She was just a mother holding a child who could see her for the first time in his life. "Baby," she wept. "Oh, my baby. Oh, God. Oh, God." Ray held her tightly. His eyes remained open, staring at the blur of light and shadow that was his mother's hair, her shoulder, the shape of her body wrapped around his. He was crying too, tears that he could finally almost see. Raymond stepped back into the corner of the office. He leaned against the wall and let his own tears fall. His grandmother's face swam before him, weathered and kind and proud. His wife's face followed, pale and thin in her final days but smiling because she had believed in him when no one else did. "This one is for you, Sarah," he whispered. "You were right. It mattered. It always mattered." Victor Dalton stood alone by the door. His hand had fallen away from his weapon. His face was slack with shock. He had spent his career identifying threats and neutralizing dangers. He had never learned what to do when the threat turned out to be a miracle. He watched the mother and son holding each other in front of the glittering city. He watched the janitor weeping silently in the corner. And for the first time in 23 years of protecting people who mattered, Victor Dalton wondered if he had any idea what mattered at all. The impossible had happened. A maintenance man with an herbal extract had done what Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and the Mayo Clinic could not. He had given a blind boy sight. The emergency ophthalmology team arrived at 3:17 in the morning. Melissa had made one phone call to Dr. Harrison Webb, the chief of ophthalmology at UCSF Medical Center and the most respected eye specialist on the West Coast. She had told him to bring his best team and his best equipment and to be at Carver Tower within the hour. She had not explained why. She had not needed to. When Melissa Carver called at 3 in the morning and demanded immediate attendance, the medical establishment responded. Dr. Webb arrived with 2 residents, a portable slit-lamp microscope, and a case of diagnostic instruments that cost more than Raymond earned in a year. He was a tall man with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who had spent decades being the smartest person in every room. He took one look at Ray sitting in the leather chair, his eyes tracking the movement of people around him, and his professional composure cracked. "This is not possible," he said. "I reviewed this patient's file myself 2 years ago. The optic nerve hypoplasia was confirmed by imaging. He should not be able to perceive light, let alone track motion." "Look at his eyes," Melissa said coldly. "Stop telling me what should be possible and look at what is actually there." Dr. Webb set up his slit lamp and positioned Ray's chin on the rest. He shone the narrow beam of light across the boy's corneas, and the room fell silent as the blue glow illuminated what Raymond had seen with his penlight hours earlier. "Jesus Christ," Dr. Webb breathed. He adjusted the magnification and leaned closer. His residents crowded behind him, staring at the image projected on the portable screen. What they saw made one of them gasp audibly. The corneas were covered with deposits. Layers upon layers of crystalline formations had built up over years, creating a dense opacity across the entire visual field. The deposits were characteristic and unmistakable. Dr. Webb had seen them before, in textbooks and in the occasional acute case that came through his clinic. But he had never seen anything like this. Never such extensive coverage. Never such long-term accumulation. "Acanthamoeba keratitis," he said, his voice hollow. "Massive bilateral involvement. The deposits must have been forming since infancy. They have been blocking virtually all light transmission to the retinas." "How is that possible?" one of his residents asked. "This patient was diagnosed with congenital optic nerve hypoplasia. The MRI confirmed underdeveloped nerves." "How did everyone miss a corneal infection?" Dr. Webb straightened up and removed his glasses. He rubbed his eyes with the weariness of a man confronting a catastrophic professional failure. "Because we were not looking for it," he said. "The optic nerve abnormality was real. The imaging was accurate. But we assumed that was the cause of his blindness, and we stopped looking for other factors. The corneal changes would have been subtle in the early years. By the time they became pronounced, we had already established a diagnosis and were not examining the anterior structures with appropriate scrutiny." Melissa stood motionless by the window. Her face was carved from ice. "What about his pain?" she asked quietly. "My son reported eye pain for years. Why was that dismissed?" Dr. Webb looked at her and then looked away. "I would have to review the records." "I already have," Melissa said. 22 documented complaints over 6 years. Would you like me to read you the notations?" She picked up a tablet from her desk and began to scroll. "March 2019, she read. "Patient reports burning sensation in eyes. Assessment: psychosomatic manifestation consistent with adjustment disorder. No treatment indicated." July 2020. "Patient reports pressure behind eyes and heavy feeling. Assessment: attention-seeking behavior related to disability. Recommend continued behavioral therapy." November 2021. "Patient reports worsening eye pain, especially at night. Assessment: neural confusion. Patient cannot actually feel eyes due to nature of condition. Reassure patient and family that symptoms are not physically based." She looked up from the tablet. Her eyes were burning with a fury that made even Victor Dalton take a step back. "My son told you he was in pain," she said. "He told you over and over again for 6 years. And you wrote it off as imagination, as attention-seeking, as confusion. You told an 8-year-old boy that he could not possibly feel what he was feeling because your textbook said it was not possible." Dr. Webb opened his mouth to respond, but Melissa cut him off. "Get out," she said. Take your readings and your samples and get out of my office. I want a full written report on my desk by noon. I want the names of every physician who examined my son and dismissed his symptoms. And I want you to understand that what happens next will be a reckoning." The medical team packed up their equipment in silence. Dr. Webb paused at the door and turned back. "Mrs. Carver," he said, "the herbal extract that was applied, what was in it? We need to understand what initiated the dissolution of the deposits." Melissa glanced at Raymond, who had remained in the corner throughout the examination, invisible to the doctors who had walked past him without acknowledgement. "Ask him," she said. Dr. Webb followed her gaze and seemed to notice Raymond for the first time. He took in the worn blue uniform, the calloused hands, the gray stubble on the jaw. His expression flickered with something between confusion and disbelief. "The janitor," he said. "The janitor treated your son?" "The janitor saw what 17 specialists missed," Melissa replied. "Now get out." The door closed behind them, and the office fell silent. Ray had fallen asleep in the leather chair, exhausted by the night's events. His eyes were closed, but even in sleep, his face held an expression of peace that Melissa had never seen before. The furrow of chronic pain between his brows had smoothed away. The tension in his small body had released. He looked, for the first time, like a child who was not suffering. Melissa stared at her son for a long moment. Then she turned to Raymond. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words seemed to cost her something. She was not a woman accustomed to admitting error. "I called you a janitor, as if that word meant worthless. I dismissed your knowledge because it did not come with credentials. I almost had you arrested for trying to save my son." Raymond shook his head. "You were protecting your child," he said. "That is not something to apologize for." But Melissa was not finished. "I am going to hold a press conference," she said. "Tomorrow. I am going to tell the world what happened here tonight. I am going to expose the systematic dismissal of patient-reported symptoms that allowed my son to suffer for 6 years while experts told him his pain was not real. I am going to sue my own medical advisory board for malpractice. And I am going to announce the creation of a new initiative that integrates traditional healing practices with modern medicine." She paused. "I want you to be part of it," she said. "Not as a janitor, as a partner." Raymond stared at her. He thought of Sarah. He thought of his grandmother. He thought of all the years he had carried knowledge that the world considered worthless, waiting for someone to listen. "I do not know anything about running initiatives," he said slowly. Melissa almost smiled. "You know how to see what others miss," she said. "That is worth more than any degree. Will you help me?" Raymond looked at the sleeping boy in the chair, the boy who had trusted him when no one else would, the boy whose life had just changed forever because a janitor had refused to look away from suffering. "Yes," he said. "I will help you." The press conference was held in the main auditorium of Carver Pharmaceuticals 3 days after the miracle in Melissa's office. Every major news network sent cameras. Medical journals dispatched their top science correspondents. The Wall Street Journal and the New York Times sat shoulder to shoulder with CNN and BBC World Service. The story had leaked in fragments over the preceding days, whispered rumors of a billionaire's blind son suddenly able to see, and the impossible circumstances surrounding his cure. The internet buzzed with speculation. Some claimed it was a hoax. Others insisted it was a breakthrough in gene therapy that Carver Pharmaceuticals was preparing to monetize. No one guessed the truth. Melissa walked to the podium, wearing a black suit and an expression of controlled fury that made the front row of reporters lean back in their seats. She did not smile. She did not soften her words with corporate pleasantries. She simply began to speak. "My son, Ray, was diagnosed with congenital bilateral optic nerve hypoplasia at the age of 4 months, she said. Over the next 8 years, I spent $47 million consulting specialists on 3 continents, pursuing experimental treatments and funding research that I believed would restore his sight. Every expert I consulted confirmed the diagnosis. Every treatment failed. And for 6 of those years, my son reported chronic eye pain that was systematically dismissed by the medical professionals I trusted to care for him. She paused. The auditorium was absolutely silent. 3 nights ago, she continued, a janitor working the night shift in this building discovered what 17 world-renowned specialists had missed. My son's blindness was not caused by underdeveloped optic nerves. It was caused by a parasitic infection that had been coating his corneas with deposits since infancy. The infection was treatable. The deposits were removable. My son can now see because a man without a medical degree looked at him with fresh eyes and refused to accept a diagnosis that did not match the symptoms. She turned and gestured toward the side of the stage. Raymond Ford walked out slowly, clearly uncomfortable in the suit Melissa had provided for the occasion. He stood beside her with his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the crowd. "This is Raymond Ford," Melissa said. "He is a former paramedic and a practitioner of traditional Appalachian medicine. He treated my son with an herbal extract that dissolved the corneal deposits in a matter of hours. He is not a doctor. He is not a researcher. He is a widower who works nights to support his teenage daughter. And he saved my son when the entire medical establishment failed." She faced the cameras directly. "Today I am announcing the creation of the Ray Carver Initiative for Integrative Medicine," she said. "It will be funded with an initial budget of $50 million. Its mission will be to investigate cases where traditional healing practices may offer insights that modern medicine has overlooked. And its first chief of traditional medicine research will be Raymond Ford." The auditorium erupted. Questions shouted from every direction. Cameras flashed in blinding waves. Raymond stood motionless at Melissa's side, looking like a man who had wandered into someone else's dream and could not find the exit. The initiative's first year exceeded every expectation. Raymond assembled a small team of researchers and began reviewing cases of patients diagnosed with untreatable congenital conditions who also reported unexplained symptoms that did not fit their diagnoses. The pattern he had identified in Ray proved devastatingly common. 89 cases were flagged in the first 12 months. 34 involved parasitic or bacterial infections that had been masked by other diagnoses. 27 involved blockages or structural abnormalities that imaging had missed because radiologists were looking for something else. 18 involved nutritional deficiencies that mimicked genetic disorders. In every case, the patients had reported symptoms that were dismissed as psychosomatic, attention-seeking, or neurologically impossible. 41 of the 89 patients showed significant improvement after treatment. 17 recovered completely. The medical journals that had once ignored traditional medicine began publishing papers on the Ray Carver cases. The phrase diagnostic humility entered the vocabulary of teaching hospitals across the country. Raymond avoided the spotlight as much as possible. He declined interview requests and refused to appear on talk shows. Instead, he spent his time in lecture halls teaching medical students the observational techniques his grandmother had taught him. He showed them how to look at a patient's skin color, posture, and breathing patterns before ever consulting a chart. He taught them to listen when patients described symptoms that did not match expected presentations. He reminded them constantly that the human body did not read textbooks and would not conform to diagnostic categories simply because a physician expected it to. His daughter, Emma, became Ray's primary tutor. The 2 teenagers had met awkwardly at first. Emma was 16 and shy, uncertain how to interact with a boy who was learning to see the world for the first time. Ray was 8 and overwhelmed, struggling to process the flood of visual information that assaulted him every waking moment. Colors were too bright. Movement was disorienting. Faces were incomprehensible masks of shifting features that he could not yet decode. But Emma had her father's patience and her mother's quiet faith. She sat with Ray for hours, teaching him to read by pointing at letters and sounding out words. She walked with him through the estate gardens, naming the colors of flowers and the shapes of leaves. She played simple games that trained his eyes to track objects and his brain to interpret what he was seeing. Slowly, Ray began to make sense of the visible world. 6 months after the miracle, the Ray Carver Initiative held its first annual gala. The ballroom of the Carver estate glittered with crystal chandeliers, silver tablecloths, and 500 guests who had paid $10,000 each for the privilege of attending. Philanthropists and physicians mingled with researchers and politicians. Cameras lined the walls, capturing every moment for posterity. Ray walked to the podium wearing a small dark suit and a pair of glasses that helped his still-adjusting eyes focus. He was nervous. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone. But when he spoke, his voice was clear and steady. "I lived in darkness for 8 years," he said. "Not because I was broken. Not because something was wrong with my brain. I lived in darkness because everyone was looking at pictures of my brain and nobody was looking at my eyes." He paused. The ballroom was utterly silent. "The doctors told me my pain was not real," he continued. "They said I was imagining it. They said blind people do not feel their eyes. But I felt them every day. I felt them hurting. And the only person who believed me was a janitor named Mr. Raymond." Ray turned and found Raymond in the crowd. The old man stood near the back of the room, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Mr. Raymond did not have a degree," Ray said. "He did not have fancy machines. He just had eyes that could see, ears that could listen, and a heart that cared enough to pay attention. He cleaned the windows so I could finally see out. And I will never forget what he taught me. Healing is not about credentials. It is about caring enough to actually see what is in front of you." The applause that followed shook the chandeliers. Later that evening, Melissa found Raymond standing alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens. The party continued inside, but he had slipped away from the crowds, the congratulations, and the endless handshakes. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at the stars. "You should be celebrating," she said. Raymond smiled faintly. "I was never very good at parties." Melissa stood beside him. The night air was cool and fragrant with jasmine from the gardens below. "I built an empire on certainty," she said quietly. "I believed that science had all the answers, that if I spent enough money and consulted enough experts, I could solve any problem. You taught me the value of humility." Raymond shook his head. "Your son taught me that my wife was right," he said. "She believed this knowledge mattered. She believed it was worth preserving. I spent years thinking she was wrong, thinking I had failed her by not being able to save her. But she knew. She always knew. This knowledge matters. It always mattered." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Below them in the garden, Ray and Emma were playing catch. The ball arced through the air, a bright yellow sphere against the darkening sky. Ray tracked it with eyes that 6 months ago had seen nothing but darkness. He caught it clumsily and laughed with pure, uncontained joy. The sound echoed across the lawn and drifted up to where Melissa stood. She closed her eyes and let it wash over her. It was a sound she had dreamed of hearing for 8 years. A sound she had spent $47 million chasing through hospitals and research laboratories around the world. It was the sound of her son experiencing the joy of the visible world. And it had cost nothing but the willingness to listen to a janitor who cared enough to see.